Good morning and welcome. I'm the Reverend Steve Cook, minister of the Unitarian Parish, and it's my pleasure to greet you on this cool, bright day here in Hopedale. Wherever you are, I hope your weather is pleasant and your month of March has been going well. As always, I invite you to explore the other postings on our Facebook page and visit our website, hopedaleunitarian.org. You can find out more about us, who we are, and what we do. I especially commend to your attention our partnership with the Community Supper Program, offered at Trinity Episcopal Church in Milford, our neighboring community. We are in grab-and-go mode just now, but plan on returning to hosting and cooking sit-down meals for those in need as soon as we can. I hope you'll consider giving them your support. There is a donate button on our website. Here in Massachusetts, we are happy to report that the numbers of COVID-19 illnesses are declining. And after a slow start, the vaccination numbers are rising. Most of us here on the worship team and in our church community are at some point in the vaccination process and expect to complete it within a few weeks. Now, in the light of this good news, people have been inquiring about when we might be able to return to in-person worship with continued appropriate precautions, of course, for those who wish to attend. Your board and I have been following this very closely the data on infection rates, vaccination rates, and the guidance from the state. We had been planning on September as the safest course. However, if things continue in this favorable way, it's possible we might believe it safe to offer in-person worship sometime before the finish of our usual church season at the end of June. We will keep you posted as things develop. At the same time, we will also continue to offer every Sunday our Facebook live stream, as we are doing at this moment, for those who choose not to attend in person for any reason. In fact, if we can find one bright spot in this last terrible year, it is that the virus forced us into finally integrating a video component into our worship life, something we've been talking about doing sometime. Sometime is now. And I'm glad to say that every Sunday from now on, there will always be a video and live stream outreach dimension to our worship life, in addition to gathering in our cherished sanctuary. We will be glad in your presence with us in whatever way you may join us. Now let us begin our worship. silence of this place, surrounded by the all-pervading presence of the holy, my heart whispers, keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve, that in fair weather or in foul, in good times or in tempests, in the days when the darkness and the foe are nameless or familiar, I may not forget that to which my life is committed. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. Our opening hymn is the lovely Rising Green. I invite you now to join in saying the covenant of this church. The words are in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
have for now this meditation in the form of a prayer to the God of my understanding, followed by some moments of silence. I invite you to join me in the spirit of prayer or meditation, as is your practice. O thou, gracious Spirit of life and hope, we are thankful for this day, for the warmth of gathering in this sacred time, wherever we may be, for the presence of old friends and new. We give thanks for each moment of sunshine, for each shy crocus among the dry brown husks, for the light increasing each day. We are grateful for the increasingly good result in the battle against the coronavirus. May it continue, and may we be strengthened in our resolve to stay with the simple procedures that will help us see the end of this terrible time. As always, we hold each and every caregiver in our hearts, for they truly have been heroes in this last grim year. May those afflicted soon recover. May those who have lost loved ones know the comforts of memory and hope. And may we all understand that we are in this together. And now in the silence with the voices of our hearts, we lift up our own thoughts, needs, prayers, and petitions. In returning and rest, we shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be our strength. Blessed be the silence, and amen to our prayers. Our choral response is in your order of service. I have two readings this morning from Henry David Thoreau. The first from one of his journals. The earth is not a mere fragment of dead history, stratum upon stratum, like the leaves of a book, to be studied by geologists and antiquaries chiefly, but living poetry, like the leaves of a tree, which precede fruit and flower. Not a fossil earth, but a living earth. Its throes will heave our exuviae from their graves. You may melt your metals and cast them into the most beautiful molds you can. They will never excite me like the forms which this molten earth flows out into. And this from his well-known essay entitled Civil Disobedience. If the injustice is part of the necessary friction of the machine of government, let it go, let it go. Perchance it will wear smooth. Certainly the machine will wear out. If the injustice has a spring or a pulley or a rope or crank exclusively for itself, then perhaps you may consider whether the remedy will not be worse than the evil. But if it is of such a nature that it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then I say, break the law. Let your life be a counter-friction to stop the machine. What I have to do is to see, at any rate, that I do not lend myself to the wrong which I condemn. Henry David Thoreau. Last week I shared some words from Thoreau about living with intentionality, spiritual awareness, and integrity. We Unitarian Universalists like to claim him as one of ours, and he probably was, more or less, along with a group of writers and thinkers that flourished around Concord and Boston in the mid-1800s, usually called transcendentalists. While he now has a high profile in American culture, in his lifetime, Thoreau's books did not sell very briskly and were not particularly influential. For decades, they languished in comparison to the work of Emerson, Hawthorne, Alcott, and other more famous writers of that circle. Thoreau gained currency when he was rediscovered by the generation of activists and change makers that came of age in the 50s and 60s, particularly his writings on civil disobedience. I quoted earlier, "If the machine of government is of such a nature that it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then I say, break the law. Let your life be a counter-friction to stop the machine." Likewise, Walden, his journal of self-exploration, was evocative when that same generation found itself questioning the received wisdom of society, the establishment, in regard to the purpose of life. I'm sure you'll recognize these statements of his, phrased in the gendered language of his time. If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music he hears, however measured or far away. And not all who wander are lost. For some of the 60s generation, the self-absorbed woodland rambler was seen as a sort of proto-hippie, marching to a different drummer. While for others, the man thrown into jail for refusing to pay taxes that funded a war was seen as a proto-anti-war protester. There was perhaps some truth in both. However, Thoreau's work as a naturalist was not given the same close attention, at least not until recently, when it has become clear that he was a much more systematic student of nature than was thought, not merely tramping about the woods for the fun of it, but making rather systematic observations and recording them meticulously. The fact that this escaped attention is not surprising. The man was extraordinarily prolific. In addition to his now more famous published work, when he died at the young age of 44, he left behind 39 manuscript volumes containing almost 2 million words, a journal that he kept almost daily from the age of 20 until his death. After leaving his cabin on the pond, Thoreau later became a land surveyor, and in the process traveling even further about the conquered area, recording detailed observations on the first appearances of plants and birds, the fluctuating depths of Walden Pond, and other natural patterns that he observed. Although those writings were known and preserved, for decades no one paid them close attention. This, however, has changed. For several years, serving as a volunteer, I recorded audiobooks for the sight impaired through Perkins School for the Blind in Watertown. Perkins, by the way, was the first institution of its kind in the United States, established in Boston in 1829 by Unitarians. One of the books I narrated during my service was Walden Warming by Professor Richard Premack of Boston University. His field is the biology of climate change, and he researched this in part by collecting modern data on the first spring appearances in Concord of certain plants and birds, and then checking them against observations of those same species that Thoreau recorded in his journal 150 years ago. Comparing those notes with the extensive data gathered by Professor Premack and his students in 2012, the conclusion was clear. The climate in our area has gotten significantly warmer since Thoreau's time, resulting in earlier flowering times and bird arrivals. Now, this may not sound like much of a big deal. Skunk cabbages leaf out 2 weeks earlier now than they did in Thoreau's day. But as Premack shows, there are complex, cascading consequences that flow from earlier, warmer springs that will, if unchanged, result in a noticeably different ecosystem for our area and the world at large in the years ahead. Now, there's a lot of detail in this, and if you're interested, I recommend Professor Premack's book, Walden Warming. It's readily available, and having read aloud every single word of it, I can attest that he's a very good writer who makes all of this quite accessible to the non-scientific reader. Now, weather, of course, changes from day to day and season to season. We can see that. Climate changes over decades and centuries, impossible to perceive within a single lifetime. Here we must trust the scientific data. And in this case, the science is clear. The challenge then lies in what to do with these very strong conclusions. We know that the science of this is complex and variable. In 2015, for example, the same year that I narrated Professor Premack's book on climate warming, we experienced one of the harshest winters in decades. In fact, at 110 inches, recording a new record for snowfall. Some point to that, to the legendary blizzard of '78 and other such wintry events, to deny the reality of climate warming or claim it's happening somewhere else but not around here. But the science is clear. And in this case, much closer at hand and easier to understand than Antarctic ice cores, for example. Now, it amazes me that there continue to be, as there have been for years, a number of very loud and very misinformed voices that claim climate change is a hoax being perpetrated by liberals, or the Chinese, or the European Union, or something known as the deep state. Now, just why this hoax is being perpetrated and for whose benefit always seems very fuzzy and ill-defined when you pay attention to this stuff. But it seems to be a great conspiracy to force us to drive more fuel-efficient, less polluting cars, which I think is a good thing, and also force us to use more efficient light bulbs, which I guess is an infringement on our freedom in some way. I don't get the light bulbs, I just don't get that. But I do see why the powerful fossil fuel industry would like to keep us using as much of their product as possible rather than moving to solar or wind, renewables, electric cars, and so forth, and more conservation in general. They're spending a lot of money fighting this. Now, as I said, this is admittedly complex. So I hope you will join us next week when we welcome to our virtual pulpit my colleague, the Reverend Fred Small, whose ministry has for years been centered around these very issues. Fred is the executive director of Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light. Their slogan is Faith in Action for Climate Justice. They also say that we see the earth not simply as an elegant mechanism, but as a miracle of creation. How very like Thoreau's "The earth is not a mere fragment of dead history, to be studied by geologists, but living poetry, like the leaves of a tree. Not a fossil earth, but a living earth." And they also say, we see ecological healing and environmental justice as our sacred responsibility. What we hold sacred, we will protect. How very like Thoreau's, "Let your life be a counter-friction to stop the machine. What I have to do is to see at any rate that I do not lend myself to the wrong which I condemn." One of our foundational Unitarian Universalist principles calls us to respect the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. I like to think Henry would have approved of that formulation. I know I do. And I hope we may all hold that principle dear to us. Always, always, but now especially in these burgeoning days of spring. Let us be even more aware of it as we take joy in the living poetry of the trees, the flowers, and the shrubs that are coming up around us. May it be so. I invite you into a moment of contemplation. Our final hymn together is "Blue Boat Home."
Standing
The earth is our blue boat home. We have no other. So let us cherish it, let us preserve it, let us uphold it as it upholds us, and hand it down to those who will come after. Friends, let us create peace, hold peace, and go in peace. Amen.